walked into my sister-in-law Patricia's house on Christmas Eve 2019, expecting what we always had: family, laughter, and my grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe that I'd been perfecting for 3 years straight. The dining room smelled like brown sugar and cinnamon. Cousins were already at the table. My husband Darius's whole family had gathered, just like every year since we got married. I'd spent the entire previous day preparing that pie. Mama Ruth had taught me the recipe herself, walking me through every step in her kitchen, while Patricia was out showing houses to clients. The way the sweet potatoes had to be mashed just right, not too smooth, with little bits of texture remaining. The exact ratio of butter to sugar to cream, the pinch of nutmeg that made all the difference. Mama Ruth had held my hand while I crimped the edges of the crust, her fingers guiding mine with the patience of someone who'd made 1,000 pies and understood that some things couldn't be rushed. That pie sat on Patricia's marble countertop now, still warm, the crust golden and perfect. I'd been proud bringing it in, had seen Mama Ruth's eyes light up when she saw it, had felt for a moment like I belonged to something bigger than myself. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Your support truly helps this community grow. Thank you for being here. The house was exactly what you'd expect from Patricia. Everything coordinated, everything expensive, everything chosen to impress. The Christmas tree in the corner had to be 12 feet tall, decorated in silver and gold with ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her husband James stood near the fireplace talking to Darius's brother David about something that involved a lot of hand gestures and masculine laughter. The kids ran between rooms in their church clothes, already loosening ties and kicking off patent leather shoes. I'd helped set the table earlier while Patricia directed from the kitchen doorway, glass of wine already in hand, though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. She'd had opinions about everything: the placement of the silverware, the angle of the napkins, whether the water glasses should be filled now or later. I'd smiled and adjusted things according to her preferences, because that's what you did with Patricia. You went along, kept the peace, didn't point out that most of what she was micromanaging didn't actually matter, but there'd been something different in her energy that day. A tightness around her mouth, a sharpness in how she'd corrected my napkin folding, the way her eyes kept sliding over me without quite landing, like she was seeing through me to something else. I dismissed it as holiday stress. Patricia always got intense around family gatherings, always needed everything to be perfect, always carried the weight of being the successful one, the one who'd made something of herself in real estate, the one who hosted in the big house with the crystal chandelier. Darius had noticed too. He'd caught my eye across the room while his mother was pulling him into a conversation about his job, and I'd seen the question there. "You okay?" I'd nodded, given him the smile that meant I was fine, everything was fine, just Patricia being Patricia. Now everyone was seated. 30 people crammed around Patricia's extended dining table and the folding tables she'd set up in the adjoining living room. The good china was out. The crystal glasses caught the light. Someone had already started passing the mac and cheese, the collard greens, the honey-glazed ham that Patricia had probably paid a fortune for from that specialty market she was always talking about. I just filled my plate when Patricia stood up. Her red dress caught everyone's attention immediately. That was probably the point. She knew how to command a room, how to make sure all eyes were on her. It was part of what made her good at her job, that ability to take control of a space, to make people listen. She waited until the room fell silent, until forks were set down, until even the kids stopped their chatter and looked up at the adult table where the matriarch was standing. I need to say something before we bless the food. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. Not the words themselves, but the way she'd said them. Heavy, portentous, like she was about to deliver news that would change everything. The room went completely quiet. Even the soft Christmas music playing from the speakers seemed to fade into the background. I felt Darius shift slightly beside me, his leg pressing against mine under the table, a small point of contact that usually meant solidarity. We were a team. Whatever was coming, we'd face it together. Some of you know this already, but Mama's health has been declining. Patricia looked around the table, her eyes landing on everyone except me. The doctors say she needs around-the-clock care now. We've been trying to figure out how to cover the costs, and honestly, it's been hard on all of us. I glanced at Mama Ruth, sitting at the head of the table in the chair Patricia had designated as the place of honor. She looked confused, her eyes moving between her daughter and the rest of us like she wasn't sure what was happening. I'd just seen her 2 days ago. She'd been fine. A little forgetful, maybe, occasionally mixing up what day it was, but nothing that suggested around-the-clock care. Nothing that required this kind of dramatic announcement. I set my fork down carefully. Something was wrong. Something in the performance of Patricia's sadness, in the way she'd choreographed this moment, in how she was building to something. The thing is, Patricia continued, her voice dropping into something that sounded like sadness but felt like performance, we had money set aside. Mama's Care Fund, $23,000 that the family contributed over the years. The room felt like it was tilting. I knew that fund. I'd seen the statements when I helped Mama Ruth organize her paperwork. I knew exactly where that money had gone. To medications, to doctor's visits, to the home health aide who came 3 times a week, to the medical equipment her insurance didn't cover. Every dollar accounted for, every expense necessary. That money is gone now. Patricia's eyes finally found mine across the room, and in that moment, I knew. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I was completely powerless to stop it. All of it. And I think we all deserve to know why. The temperature in the room dropped. Or maybe that was just my body, my blood suddenly cold, my hands starting to shake against the tablecloth. I felt every pair of eyes shift to me. Felt the question forming in 30 different minds all at once. Felt the accusation taking shape before Patricia even finished speaking. My cousin Shanice, who I'd grown up with, who used to sleep over at my house every weekend, who'd been in my wedding, looked at me like I'd become a stranger. Her face went through this series of micro-expressions, confusion, then realization, then something that looked like betrayal, like she was putting together a puzzle she hadn't known existed until this moment, and I was suddenly the missing piece that explained everything wrong. Uncle Jerome stopped chewing. His jaw literally froze mid-bite, a piece of ham visible between his teeth. His eyes went wide, then narrow. Then he looked down at his plate like he couldn't bear to look at me directly. Aunt Cheryl's hand went to her chest, a theatrical gesture, but the shock on her face seemed genuine. She'd been the one who'd asked me to help Mama Ruth with her bills in the first place, who'd said I was so organized, so good with numbers, so trustworthy. Even the kids got quiet. The ones old enough to understand that something bad was happening stopped moving, stopped talking, their eyes darting between the adults, trying to read the room. I don't understand what you're saying. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to, weaker, already defensive when I had nothing to defend against, already sounding guilty just by virtue of being accused. Don't you? Patricia took a long sip of wine, slow, deliberate, letting the silence stretch out, letting everyone marinate in the implication. You had access to Mama's bank account. You were helping her pay bills, remember, making sure everything was taken care of? Another pause, another sip, and now the money's gone, and she can't afford the in-home care she desperately needs. Her own mother, Darius. Your wife had access, and now there's nothing left. The way she said, your wife, instead of my name, like I was a thing attached to her brother, not a person in my own right, like my identity only mattered in relation to my failure, my suspected theft, my betrayal of the family trust. I wanted to scream. Wanted to stand up and demand to know what exactly she was accusing me of. Wanted to pull out my phone right then and show everyone the meticulous records I'd kept. The spreadsheet I updated every single time I spent $1 of Mama Ruth's money. The folder in my kitchen at home stuffed with receipts organized by date and category. But my throat had closed up. My tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. The heat of 30 pairs of eyes made my skin prickle, made sweat break out along my spine despite the air conditioning. I felt like I was shrinking in my chair, getting smaller and smaller while Patricia stood tall in her red dress. The wrong daughter, the concerned caretaker, the one brave enough to ask the hard questions. Darius stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. The sound was harsh in the silence, violent almost. "Hold on, you're not seriously accusing—" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything." Patricia raised both hands like she was the reasonable one, like she was being so careful, so fair, so measured in her approach. "I'm just stating facts. The money was there, now it's not, and only certain people had access to that account." She looked at me again, and this time there was something almost pitying in her expression. "I know it must be hard, with money being tight for you two. I know you've been struggling, and maybe you thought Mama wouldn't notice, or that it wouldn't matter, or that you'd pay it back eventually. I'm not here to judge. I just think the family deserves to know what happened to money we all contributed. Money being tight, like she knew anything about my finances, like she'd ever asked, like the assumption that I'd steal was more logical than the possibility that she was wrong about the numbers, wrong about the situation, wrong about me. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, that was too clean, too poetic for what this felt like. This was messier. This was the foundation of something I'd believed in starting to crumble. The idea that family meant safety, that these people who'd welcomed me so warmly when Darius and I got engaged would give me the benefit of the doubt, that love was supposed to mean something more than suspicion and silence. Darius's brother David, who'd been his best man at our wedding, who'd helped us move into our apartment, who'd told me I was the best thing that ever happened to his brother, was staring at his plate, not defending me, not questioning Patricia's logic, not asking for evidence or proof or anything beyond the accusation itself, just sitting there, silent, letting his sister's words hang in the air like they were established fact rather than calculated slander. Aunt Cheryl, who I'd helped move into her new apartment just last month, who'd cried on my shoulder about her divorce, who'd told me I was like a daughter to her, was looking at me now with something close to disgust, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes cold, already convicted, already certain. My sister Nicole, my own blood, wouldn't meet my eyes. She was studying her napkin with intense focus, folding and refolding it in her lap, her face carefully blank, not wanting to get involved, not wanting to take a side, not wanting to risk Patricia's displeasure by defending someone who'd already been marked as guilty. Nobody said a word in my defense, not one person, not one voice raised to say, "Wait, let's hear her side," or "That doesn't sound like her," or "Maybe there's an explanation." Just silence. Heavy and damning and absolute. Patricia turned to address the room again, effectively dismissing me. "I know this is hard to hear on Christmas. Trust me, I didn't want to bring this up today. But I thought everyone should know what we're dealing with. What some of us are dealing with anyway. We need to figure out how to cover Mama's care now, and it's going to fall on those of us who are actually committed to taking care of her. Those of us who are actually committed. The implication clear. Not me. Not the person who'd been visiting Mama Ruth twice a week for 3 years. Not the person who'd reorganized her entire medication schedule. Not the person who'd sat with her through doctor's appointments and held her hand when she got scared about her test results. Those visits didn't matter now. That care didn't count. The only thing that mattered was the money Patricia claimed was missing and the convenient scapegoat sitting at her table. I looked at Mama Ruth again. She was crying now, silent tears running down her weathered cheeks, her hands shaking as they gripped the edge of the table. She looked at me with confusion and something that might have been apology, but she didn't speak, didn't defend me, didn't say that I'd been nothing but kind and careful with her affairs, just cried and looked lost and let her daughter control the narrative. Darius grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. His jaw was set, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. He was furious, but not at me, never at me, at his sister, at his family, at the room full of people who decided I was guilty without trial. "We're leaving," he said, his voice tight. I stood up on shaking legs. My sweet potato pie was still sitting on the counter, untouched. 3 years of learning Mama Ruth's recipe, hours of work yesterday, all of it meaningless now. We walked out through the silent room, 30 people watching us go, 30 witnesses to my humiliation, 30 people who'd remember this moment, who'd tell the story later, who'd spread Patricia's version of events through the family network like a virus I had no way to inoculate against. The cold air outside hit my face like a slap. I made it to Darius's car before the crying started. Deep, ugly sobs that came from somewhere primal, somewhere I couldn't control. The kind of crying that hurts your ribs, that makes your face swell, that leaves you gasping for air between waves of grief. Darius drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Then he started cursing. Every name he could think of for his sister, every variation of liar and manipulator and cruel. The words poured out of him like he couldn't stop them, like his anger needed somewhere to go, and cursing was the only valve available. I cried the entire drive home, cried through his tirade, cried through the silence that followed, cried in our apartment while he paced the living room calling Patricia's phone over and over, leaving voicemails that started angry and ended somewhere closer to desperate. She never picked up, never called back, never gave him the chance to demand an explanation or defend me or ask why she'd chosen to destroy me in front of his entire family on Christmas Eve. I spent that night on the bathroom floor, my back against the cold tile, trying to understand how my life had just imploded, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what signs I'd missed, what I could have said differently that might have changed the outcome. But there was nothing. No magic words that would have made Patricia tell the truth. No perfect defense that would have convinced a room full of people who'd already decided to believe the worst of me. No way to prove a negative, to demonstrate that I hadn't done something, to show the absence of wrongdoing. The next morning came too early and too bright. Sunlight through our bedroom window like nothing had changed, like the world was supposed to just continue normally after everything had burned down. Darius was already awake, sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open, his face set in grim determination. "I'm going through everything," he said when he saw me. "Every bank statement, every receipt, every transaction. We're going to prove she's lying." I gathered every piece of documentation I had, every receipt I'd carefully filed away in the accordion folder I kept specifically for Mama Ruth's expenses, every bank statement I'd printed out and labeled, every medication copay slip, every grocery receipt from the organic store where I bought the specific foods her doctor recommended, every invoice from the medical supply company, every payment confirmation for her utilities. I'd been meticulous because I'd known how important it was. Because Mama Ruth trusted me with something precious, not just her money, but her well-being, her dignity, her independence. Because I'd wanted to honor that trust by being completely transparent and organized and beyond reproach. We spread it all out on our dining table. Months of documentation, a complete financial history of every dollar I'd spent on Mama Ruth's behalf. Darius created a spreadsheet, cross-referencing every expense against the bank statements, checking dates and amounts and categories. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of us sitting side by side, him typing and calculating while I verified receipts and explained what each charge was for. The numbers told a clear story, every dollar accounted for, Every expense legitimate and necessary. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been spent exactly as intended, on exactly what it was meant for. Keeping an elderly woman healthy and comfortable and cared for in her own home. She has to see this, Darius said, staring at the completed spreadsheet. There's no way she can keep claiming the money's missing when we have proof of where every single dollar went. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that evidence mattered, that facts could overcome narrative, that Patricia would look at our documentation and admit she'd been wrong. I called her 3 times that day. Each time it rang through to voicemail, her voice cheerful and professional on the recording, asking me to leave a message and promising to get back to me soon. I left messages. Calm at first, then increasingly desperate, asking her to call me back, telling her I had documentation, begging her to just listen. She never responded. I drove to her house the next day with my folder full of receipts and Darius's spreadsheet printed out and highlighted. Her Mercedes was in the driveway. The Christmas decorations were still up, the 12-foot tree visible through the front window. I knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, knocked again, waited. I could see movement inside, a shadow passing by the window, the flicker of lights being turned off in rooms I'd just seen them on in. She was home. She was avoiding me. She was choosing to hide behind her closed door rather than face me with the truth. I stood on her porch for 20 minutes, knocking intermittently, feeling more pathetic with each unanswered knock. Finally, a neighbor came out, asked if everything was okay, looked at me with barely concealed suspicion. I left before they could call the police on the desperate woman harassing their successful neighbor on the day after Christmas. That night, I scanned every document, every receipt, every statement, every piece of proof. I created a detailed email with the spreadsheet attached, with photos of the most important receipts embedded in the text. I wrote and rewrote my explanation, trying to find the right tone. Not defensive, not angry, just factual, just clear. Just please, please look at this and tell the family you were wrong. I sent it at 10 p.m., checked my email every few minutes for the next hour, then every hour, then every time I woke up during the night. She never responded. Darius reached out to his brother David 2 days later, man to man, brother to brother, thinking maybe family loyalty would work where my attempts had failed, thinking maybe David would be willing to look at the evidence and help convince Patricia to retract her accusation. David said he didn't want to get in the middle of it, said it was between Patricia and me, said maybe everyone just needed some space to cool down, said he was sure it would all work out eventually, that family was family, that these things had a way of resolving themselves. Cool down, like I was the one who'd caused the problem, like I was the one who needed to calm down after being accused of stealing from an elderly woman in front of 30 witnesses on Christmas Eve. The family group chat that I'd been part of for 6 years went strange almost immediately. Not silent exactly, but different. People still posted, still shared photos of their kids, still made plans for upcoming birthdays and gatherings. But when I posted, the responses were thin. A single emoji instead of the usual conversation, a like instead of a comment, the bare minimum engagement that couldn't be called outright ignoring but felt like it. I tested it, posted a photo of the sunset from our apartment window, something innocuous, beautiful, the kind of thing that usually generated a dozen responses. Got 3 likes, no comments, no one asking where I took it or saying it was pretty or using it as an excuse to start a conversation. 2 days later, Shanice posted a nearly identical sunset photo, 23 comments, people falling over themselves to tell her it was gorgeous, asking about her day, using it as a launching point for entirely unrelated conversations. The message was clear. I was tolerated but not welcomed, present but not included. Technically still in the group, but functionally invisible. I stopped posting after that, just watched, just saw the family continuing without me. Plans being made for New Year's Eve, a birthday party for Uncle Jerome's grandson, a brunch for the ladies, all happening in real time in the chat, everyone invited except me. Not explicitly excluded, No one said everyone except her. Just never mentioned, never asked, never included in the head count. My texts to individual family members turned blue and stayed unread. I'd see them post in the group chat hours later, so I knew they were checking their phones, knew they were seeing my name pop up, knew they were making the choice not to respond. Shanice, who I'd considered closer than a sister, posted a long Facebook status 3 days after Christmas about trust and betrayal, about how some people show you who they really are when money's involved, about how disappointing it is when people you thought you knew turn out to be different than you believed, about how sometimes you have to protect yourself from toxic people, even when it hurts. She didn't name me specifically. She didn't have to. The timing was obvious, the implication clear, and the comments, dozens of them, all from mutual friends and family members, all understood exactly who she was talking about. Hearts and prayer hands, and "I'm so sorry you're going through this," and "You deserve better." I sat in my apartment reading those comments, each one a small knife. These were people I'd known for years, people who'd been at my wedding, people who'd hugged me and called me family and told me they loved me. Now they were supporting a vague post about my supposed betrayal without ever asking me if it was true. My cousin Tasha, who'd asked me to be in her wedding the year before, unfriended me on Facebook, just quietly removed me. I only noticed because I went to look at her page and suddenly couldn't see anything. Blocked or unfriended or both. Either way, the message was the same. I was no longer welcome in her digital life, therefore no longer welcome in her actual life. The invitations stopped coming. No more Sunday dinners at Aunt Cheryl's house. No more girls' nights where we'd drink wine and watch reality TV and complain about our jobs. No more random Tuesday texts asking if I wanted to meet for lunch. No more baby showers or birthday parties or graduation celebrations. I found out about Uncle Jerome's 65th birthday party from a photo album someone posted on Facebook after the fact. Everyone had been there, the whole family. Even cousins who lived out of state had flown in. 30, 40 people gathered at some restaurant I didn't recognize, toasting Uncle Jerome, laughing in group photos, celebrating together. I hadn't even known it was happening. Darius had been invited. His mother had called him, asked if he was coming, seemed surprised when he said no. She'd made some comment about how he didn't have to miss family events just because things were complicated right now. Like I was the complication. Like my presence, or lack thereof, was the problem, not the false accusation that had made my presence impossible. He stopped going to family events after that. Told his mother he was a package deal, that if I wasn't welcome, then neither was he. She'd tried to explain that no one had said I wasn't welcome, that I was being sensitive, that maybe if I just came and acted normal, then everyone could move past this awkwardness. Acted normal. Like normalcy was something I could perform my way back into. Like pretending nothing had happened would erase the fact that Patricia had accused me of elder abuse in front of the entire family and no one had questioned it. I ran into Aunt Cheryl at the grocery store in January, literally ran into her. My cart bumped hers as I turned the corner of the cereal aisle. She looked at me, her face going through this rapid series of expressions. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been guilt, then a careful blankness. "Oh," she said. "Hello?" Not my name, not "How are you?" or "We need to talk about what happened," or anything approaching actual acknowledgement of our relationship. Just, "Hello," like I was a distant acquaintance, someone she recognized but didn't actually know. "Hi, Aunt Cheryl." I tried to smile, tried to be normal since apparently that's what everyone wanted. "How have you been?" "Busy?" She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, already looking past me to the end of the aisle, looking for her escape route. "You know how it is." "I do." I swallowed hard. "Listen, I know things have been weird since Christmas, but I really hope we can talk sometime. I have documentation of everything, all the receipts from... I really don't think this is the place." Her voice went cold, professional, the tone you'd use with a stranger who was overstepping. "I need to finish my shopping." She pushed her cart past me without another word, left me standing there in the cereal aisle, half a sentence still caught in my throat, feeling like I'd been slapped. I saw her post on Facebook that same evening about running errands and having a blessed day and being grateful for the good people in her life. The comments were full of family members agreeing, sharing their own gratitude, talking about how important it was to surround yourself with trustworthy people. I stopped going to that grocery store, started driving an extra 15 minutes to shop somewhere I was less likely to run into anyone I knew, started avoiding the places where the family congregated, certain restaurants, the park where they held summer cookouts, the church some of them attended. I became a ghost in my own life. Not dead exactly, but not fully present either. Existing in this strange liminal space where I was still technically connected to these people through marriage and blood, but functionally severed from any actual relationship. Darius tried to maintain contact with his family, his mother especially. She'd call him, they'd talk, and he'd come home looking tired and frustrated. She kept asking him why I was being so stubborn, why I wouldn't just come to Sunday dinner, why I was making things difficult when everyone was willing to move on if I'd just let go of whatever grudge I was holding. "What did you tell her?" I asked after one particularly long call. "That you're not holding a grudge, that you're waiting for Patricia to admit she lied, that you have proof of everything and no one will look at it." He ran his hands through his hair. "She said proof doesn't matter as much as family harmony, that maybe you did spend the money on Mama's care, but the way you're handling this now is tearing the family apart. The way I'm handling it." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not handling anything. I'm just existing. They're the ones who decided I'm guilty." "I know." He pulled me close, pressed his face into my hair. "I know, baby. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry this is happening." But sorry didn't fix anything. Sorry didn't make the phone ring with invitations. Sorry didn't bring back the family I'd thought I had. Sorry didn't erase the fact that 30 people had watched me be accused of something terrible, and not one of them had spoken up in my defense. The isolation was physical. I felt it in my body. This heaviness in my chest that made it hard to breathe sometimes. This tightness in my throat that made swallowing difficult. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my mind spinning through that Christmas dinner over and over, searching for the moment I could have changed things, the words I could have said differently, the defense I should have mounted. But there was nothing. No perfect response that would have made a difference, because the problem wasn't what I'd said or done. The problem was that Patricia had decided to lie, and everyone had decided to believe her, and I had no power to change either of those facts. The first anniversary of that Christmas dinner came quietly. December 24th, 2020, a year since everything had fallen apart. I didn't mention it to Darius, didn't mark it in any special way, but I felt it. Felt the weight of an entire year lived in exile from people I'd considered family. We spent that Christmas alone, just the two of us. Ordered Chinese food and watched old movies and didn't talk about what we were missing. Didn't acknowledge the Sunday dinner happening at Patricia's house without us. Didn't check social media to see the family photos being posted in real time. But I thought about it. Thought about how different this year was from the last. How last year I'd been naive enough to believe that family meant unconditional love. How last year I'd walked into that house with a homemade pie and hope in my heart. How quickly everything could crumble when someone decided to weaponize trust. I'd stopped trying to explain myself by then, stopped carrying around the documentation like a talisman, stopped hoping that the right combination of words or evidence would suddenly make people see the truth. The exhaustion of trying to prove my innocence to people who'd already decided I was guilty had worn me down to nothing. There was a strange peace in giving up, not in the facts. I'd never stopped knowing I was right, but in the fight, in the constant mental replay of what I should have said, in the fantasy that someday, somehow, Patricia would confess and everyone would apologize and I'd get the vindication I deserved. That wasn't going to happen. I knew that now. And accepting it felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for months. I started seeing someone to talk through it all, Not a therapist exactly, I couldn't afford that, but a counselor at the community center who specialized in family conflict. Her name was Dr. Morrison, and she was in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense way of cutting through my attempts to rationalize other people's behavior. "You're waiting for them to give you something they don't have," she told me during our third session. "You want them to be fair, to be reasonable, to value evidence over emotion, but they've already chosen a narrative, and it's more comfortable for them than the truth. So I just accept that they think I'm a thief. The unfairness of it still burned. You accept that you can't control what they think. You can only control how much power you give their opinion of you." She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Right now, you're letting people who won't even look at your evidence determine your worth. That's the part you can change." I thought about that a lot in the weeks after, about how much space Patricia's lie had taken up in my head, how I'd been organizing my entire life around avoiding her family, around managing the pain of exclusion, around hoping for an apology that would never come. What would happen if I stopped? If I just accepted that this was my reality now and built a life that didn't require their approval or inclusion? I started going back to school that spring, not because of what happened exactly, but because I needed something that was mine. Something nobody could take away or twist into a weapon, something that existed independent of the family drama that had swallowed my life. I'd always wanted to finish my paralegal certification, had started the program years ago before Darius and I got married, but had put it on hold because life got in the way, because there was always something more urgent or important or expensive, because I'd told myself I'd get back to it eventually, someday, when the timing was better. The timing was never going to be better. So I enrolled, filled out the application online at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, when the silence in our apartment felt too loud and I needed to do something productive with the anger that had nowhere else to go. The coursework was harder than I remembered. Or maybe I was just older, more tired, carrying more weight than I had before. I studied while Darius worked nights, spreading my textbooks across our kitchen table, highlighter in hand, trying to make sense of contract law and civil procedure and legal terminology that felt like a foreign language. But something about the studying soothed me. The rules were clear. The logic was solid. Evidence mattered in law school in a way it hadn't mattered at that Christmas dinner. You couldn't just accuse someone and have everyone believe you. You had to prove your case. You had to show your work. You had to build an argument that held up under scrutiny. I fell in love with that certainty, with the idea that truth could be objectively determined, that facts outweighed narrative, that justice was possible if you followed the right procedures. I kept visiting Mama Ruth through all of it, twice a week like clockwork, regardless of how the rest of the family treated me, because she needed help and I wasn't going to abandon her just because her daughter was a liar. Because Mama Ruth had always been kind to me, had always made me feel welcome, had always treated me like I was family even when I was just Darius's girlfriend. Patricia was never there during my visits. I'd see evidence of her sometimes, fresh flowers that hadn't been there the week before, new groceries in the fridge, a check on the counter waiting to be deposited. But she timed her visits to avoid me, and I timed mine to avoid her. And Mama Ruth never mentioned the money or the accusation or the Christmas dinner that had broken everything. Instead, she held my hand while I helped her organize her pills for the week. She smiled when I brought her favorite cookies from the bakery on 5th Street. She told me stories about her childhood, about Darius's father when he was young, about the house she'd grown up in and the people she'd loved and lost. "You're a good girl," she told me one afternoon, her weathered hand squeezing mine. "Don't let nobody tell you different." I wanted to ask if she knew what Patricia had said about me, if she believed it, if she cared, but I couldn't bear to hear the answer, so I just squeezed her hand back and said, "Thank you, Mama Ruth." The coursework became my refuge. I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. I wasn't just learning the material, I was absorbing it, understanding it at a level that went beyond passing exams. I saw the law as a tool, a weapon even, that could protect people like Mama Ruth from people like Patricia. Professor Williams noticed. She was in her 60s, had been practicing elder law for 30 years before switching to teaching, and she had this way of looking at you that made you feel seen, really seen, not just as a student, but as a person with a story and a purpose. She pulled me aside after class one day, about 6 months into the program. "You have a natural aptitude for this work," she said, "especially elder law. Have you considered specializing?" I hadn't, not consciously anyway, but hearing her say it, I realized I'd been unconsciously drawn to every case study involving elder care, every discussion about financial exploitation, every lecture about protecting vulnerable adults from predatory family members. "There's a real need for advocates in this field," Professor Williams continued, "people who understand both the legal and personal dimensions of caring for aging relatives, people who can ask the uncomfortable questions and push back against family members who see elder care as an opportunity rather than a responsibility." I thought about that Christmas dinner, about Patricia standing in her red dress, crying fake tears about missing money, about the family nodding along, accepting her narrative without question, about Mama Ruth sitting at the head of the table, confused and powerless, while her own daughter used her as a weapon against me. "I'd like to specialize," I said. "I think that's exactly what I want to do." Professor Williams smiled. "Good. You'll be excellent at it, and the field needs more people who actually give a damn." I graduated 18 months later with honors and a job offer from a small firm that specialized in elder law and estate disputes. The work was exactly as difficult as I'd expected and twice as necessary. Every client reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Every case where funds were missing or family members were acting suspicious or the math didn't add up reminded me of my own story, my own helplessness, my own inability to prove the truth when nobody wanted to hear it. But now I had the tools. Now I had the knowledge and the credentials and the legal authority to ask the hard questions. Now I could demand documentation and cross-reference accounts and build cases that couldn't be dismissed with tears and performance and convenient accusations. One of my early clients was a woman named Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old, sharp as a tack despite what her daughter was telling people. She came into my office looking exhausted, defeated, like she'd been fighting a battle she couldn't win. "My daughter says I'm losing it," she told me, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. "Says I can't manage my own money anymore. Says I'm forgetting things, making bad decisions. She wants me to sign over power of attorney." "Do you feel like you're losing it?" I asked gently. "No." Her voice was firm despite the trembling. "I know exactly what's happening. She's been taking money from my account. Small amounts at first, then bigger. I confronted her about it, and suddenly I'm the one who's confused, who can't be trusted, who needs her to take over." I'd heard this story before, lived a version of it myself. The way abusers flipped the script, made the victim look like the problem, controlled the narrative until everyone believed the lie instead of the truth. "Do you have documentation?" I asked. She pulled out a folder. Bank statements, highlighted transactions, notes in shaky handwriting documenting every unauthorized withdrawal. The same kind of meticulous record-keeping I'd done for Mama Ruth. The same desperate attempt to prove something that should never have needed proving. We built her case over the next 3 months, cross-referenced her statements against her daughter's spending, found charges for luxury items, vacations, shopping sprees, none of which Mrs. Patterson had authorized, got testimony from her doctor confirming she had no cognitive impairment, documented the pattern of financial exploitation that her daughter had tried to hide behind accusations of incompetence. The daughter settled before we went to court, paid back every dollar she'd taken, signed an agreement to have no further access to her mother's accounts, walked away with her reputation intact because Mrs. Patterson didn't want to press criminal charges. "I just wanted it to stop," Mrs. Patterson told me afterward. "I just wanted someone to believe me." I understood that more than she knew. The desperation for validation, the exhaustion of being doubted, The relief of finally having someone listen to your side of the story and actually hear it. Another client, Mr. Chen, came to me 6 months later with a similar situation. His son had been managing his finances while he recovered from surgery. When Mr. Chen was well enough to check his accounts, he found thousands missing. The son claimed it had been spent on medical expenses, but the numbers didn't add up. The hospital bills were all paid. The insurance had covered most of it. So where had the money gone? The son told the rest of the family that Mr. Chen was confused, that the medications had affected his memory, that he couldn't be trusted to understand his own financial situation anymore. The family believed the son, believed that Mr. Chen, a retired accountant who'd managed complex budgets for 40 years, had suddenly lost the ability to read a bank statement. It was Patricia's playbook all over again. The confident lie, the convenient explanation, the family too willing to believe the accuser instead of asking the accused to defend themselves. I helped Mr. Chen gather evidence, helped him document the discrepancies, helped him find a forensic accountant who traced the missing money to the son's gambling debts, helped him understand that he wasn't crazy, wasn't confused, wasn't incompetent. He was being stolen from by someone who thought they could get away with it because family don't typically prosecute family. We recovered most of the money. The son avoided criminal charges but lost all access to his father's accounts. The family quietly accepted the truth, but never apologized for doubting Mr. Chen in the first place. Every case like this reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Every elderly client who'd been gaslit by their own children. Every person who'd been accused of incompetence when they questioned discrepancies. Every family member who'd been excluded or silenced because they dared to ask uncomfortable questions. I was good at my job, better than good. I had this ability to connect with elderly clients, to make them feel safe enough to tell me what was really happening in their families. I could spot the warning signs of financial exploitation from a mile away. I knew how abusers worked, how they isolated their victims, how they controlled the narrative, how they made it seem like the victim was the problem when they were actually the predator. My clients started requesting me specifically. Word spread through the elder community that I was thorough and relentless, and that I actually cared about outcomes rather than just billing hours. The senior partners noticed, started sending me their more complicated cases, started trusting me with situations that required both legal expertise and emotional intelligence. I found my purpose in that work, found a way to channel all the anger and hurt and powerlessness I'd felt into something productive. Every time I helped a client recover stolen funds or remove an abusive family member from their care plan or protect their estate from predatory relatives, I felt like I was rewriting my own story, like I was getting the justice I'd never gotten for myself. The transformation was gradual but absolute. The woman who'd cried on her bathroom floor on Christmas Eve 2019 was gone. In her place was someone who walked into courtrooms and conference rooms with confidence and competence, someone who knew her worth wasn't determined by whether Patricia's family believed her, someone who'd built a life that didn't require their approval. Darius watched it happen, watched me go from broken to whole, watched me find strength in helping others that I hadn't been able to find for myself. He was proud of me, told me so constantly, but there was sadness in it too. Sadness that this was the path I'd needed to take, that Patricia's lie had pushed me into becoming someone I might not have become otherwise. The family kept living their lives without us. I saw it occasionally when I let myself look. Birthday parties and anniversaries and Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The family continuing on like we'd never been part of it, like our absence was barely noticeable. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe they'd filled the space we'd left so quickly that they didn't even remember what it felt like when we were there. Maybe Patricia's version of events had become so entrenched as the truth that they genuinely believed I was the villain and they were the victims of my betrayal. I stopped checking their social media eventually, stopped torturing myself with evidence of the life I'd lost, stopped measuring my worth by whether people who'd never defended me missed my presence. I built a new life, new friends from work and school, New traditions with Darius and my coworkers, and the network of professionals I was developing in the legal community. New ways of defining family that had nothing to do with blood or marriage, and everything to do with who actually showed up when things got hard. Somewhere in the second year after that Christmas, I realized I'd gone an entire month without thinking about Patricia's accusation, without replaying that dinner in my mind, without wondering what I could have done differently. The anger was still there, but it had transformed into something else, something quieter, something that didn't wake me up at 3 a.m. or make my chest tight when I thought about it. The wound had scarred over, and while the scar would always be there, it didn't hurt to touch it anymore. Dr. Morrison noticed during one of our sessions. "You seem different," she said, "lighter somehow." "I think I'm just tired of being angry," I admitted. Tired of waiting for an apology that's never coming. Tired of organizing my life around people who don't think about me at all. "That's growth," she said simply, accepting that you can't control what they think or do, only what you do with it. What I'd done with it was build something meaningful, a career that mattered, a purpose that didn't require validation from people who'd proven they didn't deserve to have opinions about my character, a life that was full and rich and mine, independent of whether Patricia's family ever acknowledged the truth. The rage had turned to something colder, not indifference exactly, but something close to it. A recognition that these people had made their choice, and I'd made mine, and those choices meant we lived in separate worlds now. And then, in the fall of 2022, Darius's uncle Jerome died suddenly. Heart attack. No warning. 1 minute, he was arguing about football with his friends. The next, he was gone. The funeral was quick, the grief genuine, the family rallying together in that way families do when death forces them to remember what matters. Darius went to the funeral. I didn't. We'd talked about it, whether my absence would cause more problems, whether it was time to try to reconcile for the sake of major family events. But I couldn't bring myself to sit in a room with all those people again, couldn't trust myself not to break down or lash out or do something that would make everything worse. So Darius went alone, and I stayed home, and he came back with stories about how everyone had asked about me, how they'd seemed surprised I wasn't there, how his mother had made pointed comments about grudges and moving on. What he didn't tell me until later, until after Uncle Jerome's estate had become a complicated disaster, was that people had been gossiping about the will, about the fact that Uncle Jerome hadn't updated his documents in decades, about conflicting instructions and unclear beneficiaries, and a mess of paperwork that nobody knew how to sort through. Patricia's phone call came 2 weeks later, 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Darius was already asleep after a double shift at work. I almost didn't answer, stared at her name on the screen. Patricia, do not answer, because I'd labeled her contact that way and never bothered to change it, and almost declined. But curiosity won out. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the part of me that had been waiting 3 years for this exact moment. The moment when Patricia needed something from me. The moment when the power dynamic shifted. The moment when I'd finally have the choice she'd never given me. I answered without speaking. Just let the silence sit there. "I need to talk to Darius," she said. No hello. No acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken since Christmas 2019. Just straight to the need, straight to the assumption that I'd give her what she wanted. "He's asleep," I said. My voice was calmer than I'd expected, steadier. 3 years of therapy in law school and building myself back up had made me someone different than the woman who'd cried all the way home from her Christmas dinner. "Can you wake him? This is important." "It's 10 o'clock, Patricia." A pause. I heard her breathing on the other end, heard the calculation happening in real time, heard her deciding how to play this, whether to acknowledge our history or pretend it didn't exist, whether to be humble or demanding, whether to treat me like family or like an obstacle. She chose performance. Of course she did. Patricia always chose performance. "Look, Her voice shifted into something that was probably meant to sound humble, but came out rehearsed, like she'd practiced this in a mirror. I know things have been weird between us, but this is family business. Uncle Jerome's estate is a disaster, and we need someone who knows what they're doing. Darius mentioned you work in estate law now. Weird. She'd called it weird, like a mild misunderstanding, like an awkward phase, not a 3-year exile based on a lie she'd never retracted, not a complete severing of relationship, not a family-wide shunning that had left me isolated and broken. Just weird. I didn't say anything. Let the silence stretch out. Let her hear exactly how much space existed between us now. The lawyers we talked to want $15,000 just to start, she continued, her voice picking up speed like she was worried I'd hang up if she stopped talking. We can't afford that, but you're family, and I thought maybe you'd be willing to help us sort through the paperwork, figure out what's what. A pause. Then the word that made my jaw clench. As a favor. As a favor. Like I owed her favors. Like family obligations flowed in only one direction. Like she could destroy my reputation and exile me from everyone I'd considered family. And then 3 years later, call me up and expect free professional services because we shared a last name. The audacity was almost impressive, almost funny, almost enough to make me laugh. Instead, I said, I don't do family favors. Come on. Now she sounded irritated, annoyed that this wasn't going according to her script. Don't be like that. This isn't about what happened before. This is about Uncle Jerome, about making sure his wishes are respected. You know he'd want the family taken care of. What happened before? Like it was some minor disagreement we'd had, some petty argument, not a calculated public humiliation that had cost me every meaningful relationship in Darius's family. Then take care of it, I said. We need help, professional help. That's why I'm calling. I'm asking you as family to help us. There it was, the word that was supposed to mean something. Family. The word that was supposed to override everything else. The word that was supposed to make me forget that she'd called me a thief in front of 30 people and then never apologized. The word that was supposed to erase 3 years of silence and exclusion and let her access my expertise for free. You're not calling me as family, Patricia, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how clear, how completely certain. You're calling me as a professional you think you can get for free, and the answer is no. You're really going to hold a grudge over some misunderstanding from years ago. Her voice went sharp, the mask slipping, the real Patricia showing through. Are you really that petty? Misunderstanding. That's what she called it now. Not a lie, not a false accusation, not a deliberate act of cruelty, a misunderstanding. Like we'd simply failed to communicate. Like the fault was shared. Like I was equally responsible for my own destruction. I don't want to fight about ancient history, she continued when I didn't respond. I'm trying to deal with a real problem that affects the whole family. Can you please just put Darius on the phone? No. The word came out simple, final. No explanation, no justification, no attempt to make her understand. Just no. Excuse me. She sounded genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I was actually refusing her, like the possibility that I might have boundaries had never occurred to her. I said no. He's asleep, and I'm not waking him up so you can ask him to convince me to work for free after you accused me of stealing from his grandmother in front of his entire family. I paused. Let that sink in. Let her hear her own actions reflected back at her. You want help with Uncle Jerome's estate? Call one of those lawyers who wants $15,000. I charge more than that now. I hung up before she could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from anger. From something cleaner than that. Something that felt like a door closing after being left open too long. Something that felt like finally taking back power that had been stolen from me 3 years ago. Darius stirred when I came back to bed. Who was that? He mumbled, still half asleep. Nobody important, I said, and I meant it. Patricia called twice more over the next week. I didn't answer. She sent Darius a long text about family loyalty and holding grudges, and how I was being petty when people needed help. He showed me the message and asked what I wanted him to say. Whatever you want, I told him. This is between me and her. You don't have to choose. I chose 3 years ago, he said. I'm just asking what you need from me now. What I needed was for him to understand that I wasn't being petty or holding grudges. I was protecting the boundaries I'd built when nobody else would protect them for me. I was remembering that I didn't owe explanations or services or favors to people who decided I was guilty without evidence and had never once asked to hear my side. Darius told his sister that I wasn't available, that she'd need to find another lawyer, that maybe this was a good opportunity to actually pay for professional help instead of expecting family to work for free. Patricia apparently didn't take it well. She sent him an essay about how I'd changed him, how I'd turned him against his family, how she couldn't believe he'd let his wife disrespect his uncle's memory like this. The family group chat apparently had a lot to say about it too. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions about my professionalism and my obligations and my attitude. Shanice posted something subtle on Facebook about people who forget where they came from once they get a little success. Aunt Cheryl told Darius at a family dinner that I was being selfish, that Uncle Jerome would be ashamed. None of them had been ashamed when they'd let Patricia accuse me of theft. None of them had found their voices when I'd needed someone to ask questions or demand evidence or simply remember that I'd never given them a reason not to trust me. But now that they needed something, I was supposed to forget all of that and show up with a smile and free legal services. Uncle Jerome's estate languished in probate for 18 months. The family hired 3 different lawyers, each one more expensive than the last, because estate law is complicated and family dynamics make everything worse. They lost money they didn't have to lose because nobody wanted to listen to the actual professionals they were paying, because everyone had opinions about what Uncle Jerome would have wanted and nobody had documentation. I heard about it through Darius, who still attended family events without me. I didn't ask him to stop going. That was his family, his choice. But he came home from each gathering with stories about Patricia, complaining about legal fees, about cousins arguing over Uncle Jerome's house, about Aunt Cheryl saying for the 100th time that if only I had helped when they'd asked, none of this would have cost so much. "Do you want me to say something?" Darius asked after one particularly ugly Sunday dinner. "Tell them why you said no?" "They already know why," I said. "They just don't want to admit it." That was the thing nobody wanted to acknowledge. Patricia hadn't called me that night because she'd realized she was wrong about what happened at Christmas. She hadn't apologized or tried to make amends or even asked to hear my side. She'd called because she needed something, and she'd assumed that need would be enough to make me forget everything else. The estate settled finally in early 2024. The legal fees ate up almost 40% of what Uncle Jerome had left. The family was bitter about it, blamed the lawyers for being expensive, blamed each other for being difficult, blamed Darius for not trying harder to convince me to help. Nobody blamed Patricia for creating the situation that made me unavailable in the first place. Mama Ruth's health declined that summer. I kept visiting her, kept bringing groceries and organizing medications, and sitting with her when she got confused about what day it was. Patricia showed up once a month, if that, always with an excuse about work or obligations or how busy life had gotten. She never thanked me for being there, never acknowledged that I was doing what I'd been falsely accused of neglecting years earlier. Mama Ruth passed in August, peacefully, with me holding one hand and Darius holding the other. Patricia arrived 20 minutes after she'd gone, dressed like she'd come from a business meeting, tears that looked practiced streaming down her face. The funeral was the first family gathering I'd attended in almost 5 years. I sat with Darius in the front row because that's where we belonged, and I felt every pair of eyes on my back, felt the whispers that I wasn't supposed to hear, felt the weight of being the villain in a story I'd never actually played a part in. Patricia gave the eulogy. talked about Mama Ruth's strength and her faith and her love for family, talked about how hard it had been to watch her decline, how much Patricia had sacrificed to make sure she was cared for in her final years. Never mentioned that I'd been there twice a week for 5 years. Never mentioned the groceries or the medications or the hours of sitting with a woman who sometimes forgot who I was, but always knew she wasn't alone. I didn't correct her, didn't stand up and set the record straight, didn't make the funeral about old grievances or unpaid debts. I just sat there with Darius and remembered the Mama Ruth who'd held my hand when I cried, who'd told me truth had a way of coming out eventually, who'd never once treated me like anything less than family, even when her own daughter had. After the service, Patricia approached us during the reception. Her face was tired, her makeup smudged from real tears this time. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. "Thank you for coming," she said to Darius, her eyes flicking briefly to me before settling somewhere over my shoulder. "Mama would have wanted you here." "She would have wanted both of us here," Darius said quietly. Patricia nodded, her jaw tight. "I know things have been difficult. I know there's history. But maybe now that Mama's gone, we can try to move past all of that, be a family again." I waited for the apology that wasn't coming, waited for the acknowledgement of what she'd done, the lies she'd told, the years she'd let me live as the family pariah while knowing the truth. But she just stood there looking exhausted and sad, and like she genuinely believed that her mother's death had somehow erased everything else. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, and walked away to pay my respects to the other mourners, the ones who'd also believed the worst of me, but who at least had the grace not to ask me for anything in return. Darius found me later by the dessert table, standing alone while family clustered in groups that didn't include us. "You okay?" "I'm fine." And I was. I'd expected some kind of vindication from today, some moment where the truth finally mattered, or someone finally apologized, or Patricia finally faced consequences for what she'd done. But I'd learned years ago that sometimes the punishment isn't a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's just absence. It's the help that doesn't come when you need it. It's the relationship that doesn't rebuild. It's the door that closes quietly and stays closed. Patricia would have to live with that now, with the knowledge that when she'd needed professional help, the family member who could have provided it wasn't available, with the 40% of Uncle Jerome's estate that went to lawyers instead of to the family, with whatever other future situations would require someone with expertise she'd spent years making sure stayed distant. I'd built a good life without that family, built a career helping people who actually needed advocates, who didn't have anyone to ask the uncomfortable questions or demand accurate accounting, or protect them from relatives who saw elder care as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. I had Darius, who'd never wavered. I had my own family, my own friends, my own community that knew who I was without Patricia's narrative hanging over everything. Standing there at Mama Ruth's funeral, watching Patricia circulate through the room, accepting condolences, and playing the devoted daughter, I realized I didn't need her to admit what she'd done. Didn't need the family to finally believe me. Didn't need vindication or apologies or acknowledgement. I just needed to keep the door closed. We left the reception early. Darius asked if I wanted to stop anywhere, do anything, if I needed to talk about seeing everyone after so long. I told him I wanted to go home, maybe order Thai food, maybe watch something mindless on TV. He understood. He always understood. My phone buzzed 2 weeks later while I was reviewing case files at work. A text from Patricia, the first direct message she'd sent me in 5 years. "David is handling Mama's estate. Simple stuff, but there's some tax implications he's not sure about. Could you look at the documents? Just as a quick favor, for Mama." I read it twice. Looked at those words, quick favor and for Mama, like they were supposed to unlock something in me. Like invoking Mama Ruth's name was supposed to make me forget that Patricia had invoked that same name to accuse me of theft. Like quick and favor had any meaning coming from someone who'd never apologized, never admitted fault, never even acknowledged that she'd destroyed my relationship with an entire extended family based on a lie. I didn't respond, just set my phone face down on my desk and went back to my case files. Went back to helping people who actually needed help, who didn't expect me to work for free because we shared a last name, who understood that professional expertise had value even when, especially when, it was family asking for it. Patricia sent 3 more texts over the next month, each one slightly more urgent, each one carefully worded to avoid anything resembling an apology, while making it clear that David was in over his head, that the estate was complicated, that they really needed someone who knew what they were doing. I deleted them all without responding. Darius told me later that David ended up hiring an estate attorney at a significant cost, that Patricia had complained about it at Sunday dinner, that someone had apparently asked why they didn't just ask me since that's what I did for a living. Patricia's response, according to Darius, was that I was still being petty about things that happened years ago, that she'd tried to reach out, but I wouldn't let go of the past. "Did you tell them?" I asked. "Tell them that she never actually apologized? That she never took back what she said about me?" "I told them you don't owe her anything," Darius said. "I told them that's all that matters." And it was. That was all that mattered. Not the narrative Patricia had built where I was the one holding grudges and refusing to move on. Not the family's convenient amnesia about what had actually happened. Not the expectation that I should be available whenever they decided they needed me, regardless of how they'd treated me when I'd needed them. I wasn't available anymore. Not for quick favors. Not for family rates. Not for anything that required me to pretend the past didn't matter, because the present was inconvenient for them. That was my revenge, though I never thought of it that way. I just thought of it as boundaries, as self-respect, as the natural consequence of spending years building a life without them and discovering I didn't actually need them to be whole. Patricia sent one last text 6 months after Mama Ruth's funeral. Late at night, the kind of text people send when they can't sleep and old guilts catch up to them. "I know you're angry. I know you think I was wrong about the money. Maybe I was. Maybe I should have listened to you. But Mama's gone now, and Uncle Jerome's gone, and I'm tired of our family being divided. Can't we just move past this?" I read it in bed with Darius asleep beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful. Read those words, "Maybe I was wrong," and "maybe I should have listened," like they were supposed to count as accountability. Like maybe was enough after 5 years of silence and exclusion, and letting me be the family villain without ever asking to see the receipts I'd tried to show her from the beginning. I typed and deleted 3 different responses. Thought about explaining exactly why maybe wasn't enough. Why moving past this wasn't something she got to decide unilaterally. Why being tired of division didn't erase the years of actual damage her accusation had caused. But in the end, I just deleted the message without responding, because the answer to her question was the same as it had always been. No, we couldn't just move past it, not because I was holding a grudge, but because moving past something requires acknowledgement of what actually happened. And Patricia had never been willing to give me that. She wanted reconciliation without accountability, wanted the benefits of family without the responsibility of treating me like family, wanted access to my expertise and my labor and my forgiveness without ever having to admit she'd been wrong. And the thing about building a life without someone is that eventually you stop needing them to admit anything at all. You stop waiting for the apology. Stop hoping they'll finally see what they did wrong. Stop believing that acknowledgement will somehow heal what was broken. You just move forward with the life you've built, with the people who chose to stand with you, with the boundaries that protect your peace. You let the people who decided you were guilty without evidence live with the consequences of that decision. You let them need you and not have you. You let them figure out how to solve their own problems without the help they threw away. That was where I lived now, in a space where Patricia's texts went unanswered and her needs went unmet, and her version of our family history existed without my participation or validation, where I showed up for work every day helping people who actually needed advocates, who didn't assume my expertise was something they were entitled to because we shared blood. Darius rolled over in bed, his arm draping across my waist. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, and turned off my phone. Because it was fine. Not because Patricia had apologized or the family had finally believed me or justice had been dramatically served. It was fine because I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not be available when people finally realize they need you. Not be there to fix their problems or save them from the consequences of their choices or give them the reconciliation they decided they want without doing the work to deserve it. The door I'd closed stayed closed, not out of spite or pettiness or inability to move on, but because some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. Some relationships, once broken, don't get rebuilt. Some people get exactly as much access to your life as they've earned through their treatment of you. And Patricia had earned exactly this. My absence when she needed me, my silence when she reached out, my boundaries when she tried to cross them. She'd earned a life where the person she'd accused and excluded and made into a family pariah wasn't available for quick favors or family rates or moving past things without accountability. She'd earned having to pay lawyers full price. She'd earned the confusion and the cost and the complications of handling family estates without someone who knew how to navigate them. She'd earned the feeling of reaching out for help and finding nobody there, which is exactly what I'd felt reaching out for defense at that Christmas dinner 5 years ago when nobody spoke up for me. I'd earned my peace, my career, my life with Darius, my distance from people who decided I was guilty before ever asking if I was innocent, my freedom from the obligation to forgive without being asked, to help without being respected, to be available without being valued. That was my revenge. Though revenge wasn't really the word for it. It was just consequence. Just the natural result of choices that had been made a long time ago, on a Christmas Eve, when I'd been accused of something I didn't do, and nobody had cared enough to question the narrative. Now, the narrative didn't matter anymore because I'd written my own story, one where Patricia didn't have a starring role, where family obligations didn't trump self-respect, where being unavailable wasn't pettiness, but rather the most honest expression of what our relationship had become. Nothing at all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And before you go, click on Hype to help this video reach even more people. Your support keeps these voices alive and keeps our community growing. Thank you for listening.